Before we do that, just want to remind everyone of the great content over at BangTheBook.com that can be yours for the low price of $0. We do all kinds of great stuff over there at the website. You take advantage of experts in the industry giving their insight and advice on the NBA, NHL, NFL, college basketball. I'll have tons of Major League Baseball stuff coming out here over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So we've got our matchup data section over there, free contests where you can win cash prizes, sportsbook reviews, so much going on. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Don't forget about that promo code over at DSI Sportsbook. If you sign up using the promo code BTB and the number 25, $25 free bet, 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook, 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino as well. At BetDSI, it's only a game until you bet it. Two guests coming your way here today. The first, Mr. Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
Going all right, man. Heck of a NFL Sunday. Some real drama there yesterday. So sports betting kind of got in the mainstream a little bit there at the end of that game yesterday, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. It was fascinating to watch. And, obviously it was, we oftentimes get these big moments out of somebody making a mistake. And for poor Marcus Williams, I was DMing with Joe Everett, who's going to be coming up later on the show, and I was like, was that the worst defensive play in NFL history? Given the spot, the circumstances, the fact that if he just tackles him in bounds, that game's probably over. And that poor guy, it's just, I feel awful for him. Obviously, he made a mistake with the angle that he took, and no one really knows why he did it, and he couldn't really explain it either. But it was one of those quintessential sports moments where just absolute jubilation for somebody and the complete opposite for a lot of other people.
Yeah, and you have to feel bad for him. He's been a good player for them. So, hopefully they aren't too hard on him. I know that, some fans are going to give him a really hard time, and that's unfortunate. But, there's always the two sides of it, like you say, and it's hard to believe the back and forth at the end of that game, and even the Jaguars and Steelers game had quite a bit of drama as well. I think it was a good Sunday for the NFL as far as drama.
Well, and obviously we had a blown coverage that decided the national championship game between Alabama and Georgia, and that one, it's amazing. In the span of a week, that's almost been erased from the memory just because of everything else that's gone on here over the last 6 or 7 days. But thinking back to that game, thinking about the college football season as a whole, I've been asking this question of the professional handicappers that we've had on the show, and I want to get your takes on it as well, and then we'll transition over to the college hoops side. But, as you look back at your 2017 college football campaign, Kyle, what do you feel like worked really well for you?
Well, first of all, I'd rather not think about that national title game too much. I had the under in that game, and thanks a lot for reminding me about that game. But
you're welcome.
No, it was a really good season for me overall, and 56% winners overall. So I'm certainly happy with how things went. 58.5% on totals. What went right for me? I'm staying ahead of pace changes in the totals market. It's something I've gotten better at over the years. Being able to track tempos and tempo changes, efficiency, adjust my numbers quickly enough to get ahead of the market. I think that's what went right for me. And over the last few years, I've kind of honed my system on how that works with totals. And, for several years in a row, it's worked pretty well here. So I've been happy with that. And then another thing that I've done well with is, something we've talked about quite a bit in the past is totals betting when it comes to weather. My favorite weekends to bet college football and the NFL for that matter, but especially college football, are the weekends where we have some kind of big storm with a lot of wind and rain, because I try to get ahead of those line moves and try to get some good value on that. And again, this year that worked out for me. So overall, I'd say that's what worked best for me this season.
All right, now, of course, we got to talk about the flip side, because we're always evaluating ourselves as handicappers, looking for ways to improve. And as you said, 56% is an outstanding season in college football. And, for people that don't understand the industry as well, it may not seem like a whole lot, but that's very, very good over a college football campaign. But I imagine you're still striving to get to 57, 58%, keep driving that number up a little bit. So what do you feel like didn't work for you here this past season?
Well, the first thing would be, on sides, I have a hard time trusting my numbers on the really big underdogs, and it cost me a few times this year. It's just it's natural to have some of that difficulty when you're taking a, plus 24, plus 24.5, something like that. You have plenty of reasons to not like that game when you research it, because that team's going to be so much worse than the other team. And still, personally for me, sometimes it's hard to pull the trigger on those. And I cost myself a few wins this year with not trusting myself on the numbers on those big underdogs. And that's something that I have to work with over time. And it's partially because I'm better at totals than I am at sides. So, I trust myself a lot more on totals than I do on sides to start with. The second thing I would say is I sort of capitalized on the season win total market more. It's an area of strength for me, and it's something I've done well in the past. And, this year I didn't play very many of them at all. The difficulty for me is it's hard for me to get to them early enough, because we've talked about how quick those season win totals come out now. And, that's baseball season, and I handicap baseball quite a bit. And, NBA season's still going on when they put them out now a lot of times. So it's just one of those things where I wish I could take advantage of the season win total market more as well.
Is it a problem for you, too, about, tying up such a percentage of your bankroll when you are a little bit of a higher volume guy? And, that's part of the problem is that, you look at these college football season win totals, and, we talked with Brad Powers last week about how they are, a softer market and something you can look to take advantage of. But also for you, you're playing a fairly high volume of college football games, and these season win totals aren't decided before the college basketball season begins, and you're a high volume guy with that as well. So is it a bankroll concern as well, not wanting to tie your money up for that long?
Yeah, I don't love doing that. I don't love the, 7 months of waiting to get it back. So, subconsciously it's something that can bother me a little bit. I certainly can tie it up if I have to, and I think that I need to more often, because I think, like you said there, I do think it's a softer market. Anytime you give yourself, that larger sample size of games, and you can just handicap the schedule and the team, I think you give yourself a better chance. So I think that, as long as you're able to set aside that money, it is a good idea. And like I said, I'd like to do more of it in the future. It's just so hard to, be really well prepped for the season when those come out so early.
Well, and something I talk about on the show and something I talk about in my content over at the website is that, a lot of times for me, I just think of handicapping as trying to limit as much variance as possible, because you can't account for everything. I mean, just look at the fourth quarter of that Saints-Vikings game. You were sitting on a stone-cold under going into the fourth quarter, and then all of a sudden you have, a 29-point fourth quarter, and you're like, well, what the hell's going on here? You really can't handicap for that. You can't account for that. But what you try to do is you try to limit variance as much as possible. And when it comes to a one-game sample, betting college football week by week, there's a high amount of variance in that. When you look at season win total betting, it is a much lower amount of variance, because you're talking about a sample size of 12 or 13 games as opposed to a sample size of one game. So I do think that there are a lot more advantages to doing something like that, and it's something that I'll look to do more this year. I wrote a ton of season win total previews over at BangTheBook.com, and they came out a little bit after the numbers opened. So there was some lost value on some of them. But still, I mean, when you look at the advantages, the disadvantage of having your money tied up is certainly out there. But for somebody who's more selective like me and not an action junkie at all, it makes perfect sense to go out there and take advantage of that futures market. I do it a lot with baseball with the season win total market. And I think as we get, more parity, a wider talent pool, the variance of single game betting is just going to continue to increase. And that's why I think, picking spots with those season win total types of plays, is a good change going forward.
Yeah, I think so as well. And like you said, I mean, it's such a larger sample size that variance is reduced a lot. It's kind of like if you have a handicapper who's good at college football, you can trust their season numbers a lot more than you can trust their, week-to-week numbers. Anybody's going to have a bad week or can have a bad week at any point. A really good college football handicapper over the long term, and, obviously anybody can have a bad season as well, but over the long term, years at a time, those guys are going to do well. But if you pick out just one random weekend, they could have a really bad weekend. And I think that kind of goes to speak to why season win totals would make more sense as well.
All right, let's transition over to the college basketball side here for our Handicapping the Hardwood segment. We'll be doing this here as we go throughout the rest of the college basketball season, and we may try, with Kyle's schedule permitting, of course, to get him on a little bit more often once we get to the conference tournaments and talk more about those games, and obviously, through March Madness as well. But, for now, we'll be on every Monday here talking college hoops. And something you wanted to start with here today, I think this is a very interesting thing to take a look at. Conferences where underdogs have had a lot of success here over the last 12, 13 seasons. You've got a couple of them that you've highlighted here in today's show notes.
Yeah, the reason I want to talk about this today is January and February have easily been the two best months for underdogs in college basketball over the last 10 years. It makes sense to me, conference season, these teams know each other. Underdogs have more value here now than they do earlier in the season and than they do later in the season, because once you get to March, there's some games in early March and, the regular season schedule, but some of the teams have given up at that point. So, that can get a little bit tricky. But at this point in the season, most teams are still invested. It's early in the conference season. The first conference was the MAAC. This is a conference where Iona has done really well, but there's not really, too many dominant teams in that conference. 53.6% ATS dog covers for the last, that's since 2005. So a really big sample size there. What's most interesting to me is that if you take underdogs on the road only, you're at 57.5% over that span, and that's a really large sample size since 2005. Not great home court advantages here. And I also think it's important to point out there's really not long travel spots here. We talk about some of the travel spots in, say, the AAC, which has been a good one for home teams and favorites, ironically. It makes sense. And then the opposite is true here. The MAAC, there's just not that many long travel spots and not many home court advantages. But 53.6% underdog covers overall and 57.5% on the road.
Yeah, the MAAC is really fascinating to me because you used to have some really significant pace changes. I mean, there still are a few. St. Peter's plays remarkably slow. Iona used to play at that breakneck pace and really want to run up and down the floor. They've kind of tempered that a little bit. You've had teams like Monmouth go and kind of make some national noise, and you'll get them this year. They're 5-12, off to a 1-4 start in conference. Canisius used to be a bottom feeder in this league. They're 5-1 in conference play so far. Niagara, I think they had a couple years where they won 3 or 4 games. They've already got 4 wins in conference play. They're 11-8. So I think that is something here in the MAAC is that you don't have the great home court advantages, as you mentioned. You don't have the long travel spots. And also, this feels to me like it's a league where there's just year in and year out not a whole lot of depth. It's a lot of star power driven, where if you've got 1 or 2 guys that are clearly the best players in the conference, you can have a lot of success. And that sort of lends itself to some underdogs where you've got this great player on a really bad team. That's a team that can hang around in a league like this. Yeah,
and that's true. And I think the fact that, one player can change it so much also would speak to why, it'd be hard to line those games because, that team might have been pretty bad last year, but now they get one different player and they can jump up in the standings quite a bit, and maybe that team's been underdog for quite a while through the season. Iona has done really good in this conference, but I wouldn't say that they've really dominated from an against the spread standpoint. This is a team that has played quite a few close games even in the last few seasons. And then you had Monmouth as a good team there for a little bit. But, you really can't point to too many teams in this conference that are that much better than anybody else. And like you said, the pace change thing, I think, is part of the reason why the underdogs have done so well as well, because, some teams are just not very comfortable playing against a pace like St. Peter's, a team plays against like them. I mean, that's a St. Peter's team that is so much different than most teams in this conference, it can be really hard to win by a spread when you're playing against a St. Peter's team that plays good defense and also just plays so much slower than everybody else. And then, I think that lends itself to closer games because of the change from one game to the next. You have a Niagara team, an Iona team, Ryder, that are really running and playing extremely fast. And then you have St. Peter's and a couple of the other teams sometimes, Quinnipiac, Fairfield used to play slow, and now they're playing faster. But, that type of thing I think lends itself to the underdogs as well. And like I said, not very big home court advantages in this conference either.
All right, one other conference where the dogs have been barking a little bit, this one's certainly higher profile than the MAAC, the SEC. Give us the numbers on that and your thoughts as to why you think it's been a pretty good conference for the dogs.
Well, the SEC since 2005, underdogs are 52.8% ATS. I know that doesn't sound great, and 52.8% is not a huge number, but over a 1,500 game sample size, it is certainly something to keep in mind. I think there's a lot of teams in the middle of the SEC in the past few years where there's just not much of a difference, and it's hard to say who's going to win that game. And I really think that has a lot to do with why the underdogs have covered so consistently here. In the last 5 years, underdogs are 54.8% in SEC conference play. So underdogs were decent there over the 13-year span, but in the last 5 years, it's been even stronger. I think, you've had Kentucky be a dominant team in this conference, but outside of Kentucky, and obviously they're not dominant like they were in the past, but outside of Kentucky, most of these seasons, there's been a lot of teams in the middle of the pack where it's kind of hard to say who's going to be in the big dance. There's a lot of teams on the bubble in this conference, and I think that makes those 5 or 6 points that you're grabbing in a game like that pretty intriguing, just because there's really not much difference between those two teams. So this is one where home underdogs and road underdogs haven't done much different. Road underdogs is just a little bit higher here in the SEC, not the huge split, though, like there was in the MAAC.
I think, too, when you get a conference like the SEC, where you've had a team like Kentucky that's been really dominant, or, Florida had some very dominant years there as well when Billy Donovan was around, you have these teams like Kentucky and Florida that, they're going to coast to winning the conference or, being a top 3, seed in the NCAA tournament. So maybe they're not as invested, maybe not as motivated to blow teams out the way that they should. We see some line inflation there when you are that much better than the rest of the conference. And then you get into a situation where the opponent that just played a Kentucky or a Florida goes into a next game. Maybe they're a short favorite or a moderately sized favorite. They're coming off the letdown of just playing Kentucky and Florida. So maybe they don't have as good of a performance. It's kind of a snowball effect there where you've got these two teams that have run the conference for so long that, just kind of has a negative impact on everything that goes on, in a favorite role in that conference. So, maybe now that we've got some more parity here, I wonder if that script changes a little bit and maybe we do start to see the favorites do a little bit better in the SEC.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. You kind of said what I was going to say myself there, that, I do wonder if the underdogs in the SEC are going to continue to do as well as they have, because I think this conference is so much different than it's been in past years. I would worry a little bit just on blindly taking the underdogs in the SEC. I do think, in a conference like the MAAC, underdogs will continue to do well. The SEC, I'm a little bit less sure about.
Since we're talking about the SEC, let's go ahead and do this. Rick Barnes, Tennessee. Anything you want to say about him?
You caught me off guard, but I always like a Rick Barnes comment. Rick Barnes is one of those guys that the smarter thing you can do is fade Tennessee in second halves when they have a lead. So, let them get that lead at halftime, and then even if they're playing against a team that's not as good as them, fade them in the second half, because those adjustments in the second half from him aren't going to be as good as they are from almost every other coach.
Yeah, anytime we can kick Rick Barnes, we like to do it here on the show. He's kind of our Jim Mora Jr. when it comes to college basketball. And I think you and I had a hand in getting Jim Mora Jr. fired. So, obviously our apologies to his family, but, it was a shame what he was doing there at UCLA. not maximizing all the talent that was there. Anyway, we'll transition away from beating up on Rick Barnes and talk about a team to sell high here. We like to do this buy low, sell high type segment pretty much every week. And, sometimes these are long-term looks. Sometimes they're medium-term. Sometimes they're short-term where, you may get a little bit of value on a couple game basis, and then you may want to reevaluate at that point. Who are you selling high here this week, Kyle?
I'm going to sell high on South Dakota State. I think South Dakota State's a good team, so it's not that I think they're a bad team, but they are shooting the ball extremely well right now, averaging 1.267 points per possession in conference play. I don't think that's sustainable. I mean, they're going to shoot the ball well, and they averaged 1.16 points per possession last year. Maybe they finish around that number again this year, but they're not going to keep shooting this well from the floor. They're 10-5 ATS. I think they regress some here going forward. So this is a longer-term look that I think that they're a quality team, but I think their numbers are just going to get too big.
And this is also a team, if you look at Ken Pom, and I know everybody uses Ken Pom, but I can just throw this out here. They are 213th in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency. So as that offense starts to regress, it's not like this is a team that can really rely on its defense to pick up the slack and cover some numbers.
Right, absolutely. This is a team that relies on outscoring people, and they're laying some big numbers here in conference play. And I think they're going to win a lot of games, but I don't know that they'll be able to cover the spread very consistently now going forward. So the team that I was going to buy low on, I didn't really do this on purpose, but this is an all-summit league segment here this week. Denver, the Pioneers. Denver is not that good of a team, but I don't think they're as bad as what they've been playing. They were 16-14 last year, straight up, and this year they're 7-11. This is a team that has a lot of the same guys they had last year. They're 41st in the country in minutes continuity. So this is a team that has a lot of the same guys they had last year playing a lot of minutes, and yet they're underachieving. I think that they showed their potential a couple games ago there with that win at North Dakota State. North Dakota State's one of the better teams in this conference, yet they lost at home to Fort Wayne by 19 points. So they've been a little hard to predict so far this year, but I do think that Denver, one of the reasons I like this one too is just they have a really good home court advantage. So, I would look to play them some at home going forward because I think their numbers are going to be over-adjusted a little bit based on the fact that they've been so bad so far this year.
And I think here, too, maybe this is one where I don't know if you want to play them Thursday night in Omaha or Saturday against Oral Roberts, but they played 6 of their final 8 conference games at home. They've only played 2 home games since December 13th, so they're not getting to take advantage of the home court there in the altitude. So, with them playing 6 of their last 8 conference games at home, going into the conference tournament for the Summit League, maybe that would be a really good spot to start to look to back them. When they play, they start with Western Illinois, who's the worst team in the conference right now. Then they host South Dakota, who's pretty good. At Fort Wayne, that's a revenge game for them because they just lost by 19 in that one. And then 4 home games in a row. So, maybe Denver with the backloaded home schedule here, this could be a long-term look for sure.
Yeah, this is definitely more of a long-term look. And, like you said, only 2 home games since the 13th of December, and one of them was against Colorado Mesa, whoever that is. So they haven't really – there was only 1 line game at home since December 13th. So I think that there will be spots to take advantage of their good home court advantage. And honestly, I kind of hope they don't cover the next couple games here Thursday and Saturday on the road so that we get more value on them going forward.
The Colorado Mesa Mavericks, just in case you were wondering. So now if anyone ever gets into a bar bet about the mascot of Colorado Mesa, you're going to know who it is. All right, let's look at some of these games here that you want to touch on, and we're going to have 2 that are very, very under the radar. We're going to do the SoCon and the Ohio Valley, and then we'll finish up with a couple of higher profile teams. Beginning with the matchup between East Tennessee State and Furman. Furman, of course, who, by the way, just hired Connor Shaw to be their tight ends coach on the football side, just in case anybody missed that, life-altering tidbit there. But you've got a pretty good one here between these 2 teams at the top of the SoCon.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight this game mainly because, I like to talk about different conferences. We don't talk about the SoCon too much. And this is a really important game for these these two teams based on them being at the top of the conference. You know, Wofford's another team that's going to be at the top of the conference there, but these two teams are going to be duking it out. You know, I think East Tennessee State, Steve Forbes has done a really good job there. This is a team that lost several players from last year's team, and here they are sitting at 14-4. You know, East Tennessee State was good last year. They made it to the NCAA tournament. A lot of people thought they'd be down quite a bit from last year, and here they are at 14-4, and they've won every game they've played since November 25th, other than their road game at Xavier that they lost by 2 points. And I'm pretty sure they were way ahead in that game. Xavier made a really big comeback. They were down 51-29 to East Tennessee State. So, you know, East Tennessee State's a really good team. They've been winning with defense, only allowing 0.886 points per possession inside the conference. That's about as good as you'll ever see. Furman so far this year, you know, they have a different coach in Bob Ritchie. Nico Medved was a tremendous coach. He's doing a really good job in the MVC now. Bob Ritchie has done a good job with this Furman team. He has a really veteran team. They're 18th in the country in minutes continuity, so he's done a good job not rocking the boat there. I think it'll be interesting to see what this line comes out at. I think it'll be about pick'em. Maybe Furman favored by a point. To me, this is a game that I'm more interested in just to see what these teams do against each other as far as finding value going forward than I am betting this game. But I think that this game will go a long ways towards deciding who wins the SoCon.
I think it's pretty impressive when you look at what Furman has done this year. Their 5 losses at Butler, at Duke. They got blown out at home by Winthrop, which is kind of the outlier for them, at Tennessee, and then their last loss on the road at Wofford. And maybe that was a little bit of a look-ahead spot for Furman here with this East Tennessee game coming up. And you know, that's a reminder that we obviously think about look-ahead spots in major conferences when you're playing Kentucky or you're playing, maybe not Kansas this year, but Oklahoma or West Virginia or, playing Duke, North Carolina, stuff like that, Arizona. You think about look-ahead situations in those types of leagues, but don't forget to look for those look-ahead spots in these smaller conferences as well, because as you just mentioned, this is a huge game for Furman. And when you're a Furman team where 3 of your 5 losses, are to Butler, Duke, and Tennessee, that's pretty legitimate. So you look at this as a game for superiority within your conference, then you overlook a team like Wofford, who's, a pretty decent team by SoCon standards. So it's also a good cautionary tale for listeners to remember to, take a look for some of those situational spots in these low major leagues.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this one could create a bad spot for the teams on Saturday. If they play a really tight game here, it's hard fought. They turn around really quick and play a team that they're better than on Saturday. They're going to be laying a big number, East Tennessee State against Western Carolina and Furman against Samford. Those would be spots that I'd either look to play against them or at least lay off the game. I'd hate to lay a big number in that spot because I think they're going to be up for this game, and then that really quick turnaround to play a lesser team is a tough spot.
No, it definitely is, and both of those games at home as well, where, sometimes if you're on the road, you're just kind of out there. You got to go out there and play the game anyway. If you're at home, maybe there's something else you want to be doing over at some party, at some sorority house, something like that. It can be a little bit challenging for some of these players. So we'll transition from the SoCon up to the Ohio Valley here. Interesting game here. This one well under the radar, as you mentioned in the show notes. Tennessee Tech, a team that we talked about on last week's show with Rolf Michaels, as a team that is pretty much, I think they had already surpassed last year's number of wins. They take on Eastern Kentucky. What's the story here?
Yeah, so this is kind of the premium look ahead for this week, and so far this year, these have done well. Some of the times I've ended up passing on these myself and get pretty frustrated, but, this is the one where if I get the right number, I'm going to take the over in this game. Tennessee Tech and Eastern Kentucky, this should be a really fast-paced game, and the reason I like this one is because Eastern Kentucky has changed the way they play here in the middle of the season. I like looking for teams like this where they start the season playing really slowly. Last year they played very slow. They were doing the same thing early this season, and now all at once they just decided to start running. I don't know what happened, but they're playing extremely fast. They're first in the OVC in tempo overall, 73.5 possessions per game. If you look at what they did last year, that's really a huge change because last year they were 67.4 possessions. So you're talking 6 possessions extra. That's going to make a big difference on totals, obviously. And Eastern Kentucky, had a 91-86 game against Southeast Missouri State on Saturday. That's a little bit unfortunate for the value here because that's going to push that number up a little bit. This number will probably be in the low 150s as long as it doesn't go much, above maybe 152 or so. I'd be looking to take the over in this game because Tennessee Tech's always a team that likes to run. This is a team that consistently wants to run. Some teams are able to slow them down. Murray State really slowed them down last game, beat them 71-45 at Tennessee Tech. So really bad game from them there. And also I think it's a pretty good spot for them to bounce back scoring-wise because they're a pretty good offense overall compared to other ones in the OVC at least. And here you're playing against an Eastern Kentucky defense that is really, really bad. Eastern Kentucky is 270th in the nation in defensive efficiency. I think that their numbers inside the conference are a little better than what they will finish as far as defensive efficiency. I just think this is one of those under-the-radar track meet type games, because of Eastern Kentucky's past. I don't think this one will be aligned where it should be.
Well, and you mentioned Eastern Kentucky and possibly being worried about losing a little bit of value with that 91-86 game, and then you said Tennessee Tech with 45 points there against Murray State. They were 1 of 16 from 3, and this stat is mind-blowing. I could probably go out there and do better than this. They were 2 of 11 at the free throw line. I have no idea how that's. I feel like just accidentally putting one up on the rim, 10 out of 11 times, you should do better than 2 out of 11. So, again, they weren't getting to the line a ton, but, they had 45 points because they just shot miserably bad from pretty much everywhere. So, maybe there's a little bit of value that does get incorporated into the total, because they had that 45-point game where that was just a major outlier. Murray State's, probably the best team in this conference or right up there with Belmont. So, they're not playing a team of that caliber here in this spot, but still, 2 of 11 at the free throw line. That's remarkable. All right, one more game to look at here for this week. That's going to be out in the Pac-12. Washington State takes on Utah. This one's a pretty straight handicap here, but still an angle that we can sometimes overlook.
Yeah, this is one of those where you really got to look for those spots for the double elevation spot in the Pac-12. You play Colorado, you play Utah. And this one, it's Washington State. This is a spot where we're looking ahead quite a bit, obviously, here. But Utah and Washington State, Washington State's second straight game at elevation. Washington State is not a deep team. This is a team that we talked about them early in the season as being a team that was really overachieving when they beat St. Mary's and San Diego State. Maybe you look to go against them. If you've gone against them since then, you've done really well. I haven't taken advantage of that like I should have. But, Washington State's a team that certainly is not playing like they were early in the season. Those couple wins look more like a fluke than anything else at this point. They're coming off a nice win against California. But California is not very good. It was a 25-point win, so you give them credit on that. But now they go play Colorado and then play Utah. And, to me, this is a good spot to lay the points with Utah if you do anything here. Utah has lost 4 straight games. They play Washington on Thursday. They'll probably win that game. They'll certainly be favored to win that game. But I don't think that the line here will be too huge because Utah hasn't been that good. You can get a little bit dicey sometimes in these spots if you go to lay a ton of points. But, if you're laying 6 or 7 points, it's quite a bit easier to want to take it. And I think Utah is certainly a more consistent team than is Washington State. And I would rather lay the points in this one. And I think it also matters how that game goes on Thursday for Washington State. How do they play at Colorado? You kind of hope for them to, play a tight game, lose a really close one, something like that, than you would them get blown out in that game because that would hurt our value for the next game.
Yeah, and that's a really important distinction. You and I both write situational articles over at BangTheBook.com, me with NBA and NHL, you with college basketball. And while we highlight these spots, and obviously I write mine on Sunday, and some of the games are the following Saturday or Sunday, we highlight these spots thinking that, if everything plays out the way that we expect it to, if Washington State gets blown out by Colorado, probably not going to be a whole lot of line value to take Utah. Similarly, if spots don't set up the same way in the NBA or the NHL, because recency bias does play a big role in the lines, maybe there's not as much value in that game. So we talk about these longer-term looks. We give you some shelf life on these to keep them in the back of your mind, but, don't hesitate to revisit the topic with one of us throughout the week to see if it is something that we still like.
Yeah, a lot can change in that time span. There can be, if Washington State went and won their game on Thursday against Colorado, it would really make me like that spot against Utah on Sunday because, I don't think they're going to win back-to-back games at elevation, and that would be an upset there against Colorado. And like you said, now if Washington State would lose by 20-some points, then I'm probably not going to like this one very much because instead of laying, 7 or 8 points, you're going to be laying 10, 11, and I don't feel too comfortable doing that in a spot like this with a Utah team that's not really that good. So we'll see what happens between now and then, but my lean in this game would be taking Utah.
Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. What do you got going on over there right now, man?
A lot going on with basketball and NFL playoffs, obviously. Be sure to sign up for that free pick newsletter if you haven't already. 63-32 in the last 95 free picks that have gone out. Sent one over for basketball on Saturday that was Montana and Portland State over that cashed pretty easily. So I'll be sending those out a little by little throughout the course of the basketball season as well. And there'll be some contests and things like that I'll run for newsletter subscribers as well. So if you haven't already signed up, please do that.
And you can follow Kyle on Twitter at Kyle Hunter Picks. Kyle Hunter, HunterSportsPicks.com. Appreciate your time here today, man, and we'll talk to you again next week.
All right, talk to you then. Thanks.